Hello again, welcome to another video, and a shout out to those who subscribe, comment, share and like. And today I'm in Middlesbrough, home of the unique Transporter Bridge. Well, there is another similar one in Newport, South Wales, but it looks completely different to this. And also home to the River Tees, which also plays a bit of a part in our footballing story today. So without further ado, let's move a little bit further downstream and continue. And there's a transporter bridge with the sculpture called Temenos in the foreground there, and I've moved around to the Riverside Stadium, home of Middlesbrough Football Club. Now, of course, the stadium is the footballing face of the town, but did you know that for a town the size of Middlesbrough, it hasn't had a senior non-league football club for around 30 years, until 2022, when Borough Rangers joined the Northern League. And you can see my video on Borough Rangers a couple of months back if you look for it. And that's because in 1993, one of the Northeast's oldest football clubs sadly were kicked out of the Northern League after the ground was repeatedly arsoned and fell into disrepair. Now that club was South Bank FC, situated a couple of miles further down the river, and I'm going to go and pay a visit there in a minute. And on the way I'm going to explore the history of probably Middlesbrough's greatest ever British player who was born in South Bank. And that's this fella, Wilf Mannion, the golden boy. And I'll show you a couple of other Middlesbrough greats here. George Camsell, a record goal scorer. This fellow once scored 59 goals in one season, only bettered one time by the great Everton player Dixie Dean. And here we have gentleman George Hardwick, who was captain of Middlesbrough, England and Great Britain in the same era as Wilf Mannion. And so to continue the story, we need to move a couple of miles further down the River Tees. And here we are at South Bank, so named because it's on the south bank of the River Tees, a shipbuilding area, a steel making area with a nickname Slaggy Island because the area used to be full of slag heaps. How lovely. The shipyards were over there, the steelworks as well. I'll show you some pictures of what it used to look like. A tough industrial area with people built on working grit, and still as tough as ever today. Some say as tough as they get, even in an area like Middlesbrough. But alas, the shipyard shut in 1982 and the repair yard in 2001. So as with many old industrial areas, the town was somewhat left behind. So let's take a short walk into South Bank itself and find out a little bit more about the footballing history. Okay then, just walked a couple of miles from over there and I find myself at the Asda petrol station. Now why would I come here, you might ask me? Well, I definitely haven't come for petrol. I'm here because here once stood the road called Napier Street, which was the birthplace of our friend Wilf Mannion, Middlesbrough's greatest British footballer. Now Wilf, who was born in 1918, was an old-fashioned inside forward. He made over 350 appearances for Borough, scoring 110 goals. He also played 26 times for England, scoring 11 goals between 1946 and 1951, and arguably would have got a lot more caps if it wasn't for the Second World War. He was nicknamed the Golden Boy because of his shock of blonde golden hair, and played at the 1950 World Cup with fellow Borough player Ceorge Hardwick, who I also showed you earlier. And to this day he remains as the only Borough player who scored for England in a World Cup. Now Wilf died in the year 2000 at the age of 81. But in 2004 he was inducted into the English Football National Hall of Fame and into the National Football Museum as well. And so it's goodbye to Asda and welcome to South Bank, and the football club played on Normanby Road, just a couple hundred yards down here. Now some say South Bank FC were formed in 1868, which would make them the oldest club in the northeast and one of the oldest football clubs in England. And in 1888 they were founder members of the Northern League, where they remained until over 100 years later in 1993. And they were Northern League champions 3 times, the last time being in 1927. And they were runners-up 11 times, the last time being in 1946. The most successful moment was in 1913 when they won the FA Amateur Cup, beating Oxford City in a replay. They were also runners-up twice in the FA Amateur Cup, and they've reached the FA Cup first round 3 times, although the last time was in 1926. Although they did get to the 4th round qualifying in 1985-86 when they lost 4-1 away to Macclesfield Town. And over here on Normanby Road is where the former ground once stood. And here's some photos of what it used to look like. The area is now called Golden Boy Green Youth and Community Centre after our old friend Wilf Mannion, the Golden Boy. And here's some pictures of what the ground used to look like. Now that grandstand that I just showed you was built in 1909 and was fairly luxurious for that time period, and it remained there until the ground was demolished in the 1990s. And in 1946 the ground had a record attendance of over 8,000 against northeast rivals Bishop Auckland. And the floodlights were first used in 1980, and that old stand which I showed you would have been just in front of the trees over there. In fact, you can see remnants of like the hill kind of terrace that would have been around the ground over here. So I'm wondering if you used to be able to watch the match from this little hill over here. If you remember, let me know in the comments section. Now the 1980s were a pretty successful time for the Bank, because when they finished 3rd in the Northern League on 3 occasions. And in 1985-86 they even got to the FA Trophy quarter-finals, where they lost 2-0 to Enfield right here at Normanby Road in front of a crowd of 2,380, and they even beat Wealdstone and Dartford on the way. And in the late 1980s they were even managed by former Middlesbrough player and Northern Ireland international Terry Cochrane. So if the 1980s was such a successful period for the club, the question is, what on earth happened? Well, In 1991, disaster struck when an arson attack gutted the old main stand and the dressing rooms. Then not long after, the thriving social club, the main source of income for the club, suffered the same fate. And so, with the ground now unsuitable for football and with no social club income, it was difficult to keep the club afloat and even to pay players' expenses. By the way, there used to be an entrance to the club on this side over here. Let me know in the comments if you remember. So in these desperate times and struggling to stay alive, in 1992-93, the club had to play their home games at nearby Gisborough Town and also at the old Ferriol Athletic Ground, which is 23 miles away. And unsurprisingly, they finished bottom of the Northern League Division 1 with just 17 points. So come the summer of 1993, and the FA said the club couldn't enter the FA Cup or FA Trophy that year because of the state of the ground. Then with the final kick in the teeth, the Northern League reluctantly suspended South Bank from the Northern League after over 90 years in that league. So South Bank were no longer a Northern League club, and the town of Middlesbrough no longer had a senior non-league football club. Now the club's name was kept alive for a little bit, and in 1995 they joined the Riverside League, playing at the nearby Mannion Park, but the ground was soon sold a few years after. And so in 1999 South Bank resigned from the Riverside League, and that was the end of a football club who some say were the 6th oldest football club in the country. And so the main stand would have stood just over here, right where I am. Do you have any memories of watching football or playing football here at Normanby Road? I'd love to hear some comments down below. It actually looks like this was the foundations of the stand. You can see that kind of rectangular there, the slight slope going up. Just behind that old rectangle you can see these old metal stanchions here. And somewhere over here I think was the social club. Again, let me know in the comments below. It seems somewhat appropriate that the dark clouds have come in and the rain's starting to come down on this midsummer's day. But one good thing about here, at least it didn't become a predictable housing estate or supermarket, and it's been put to some good local community use with this Golden Boy Community Centre. So that's it for this video on the famous old lost football club of South Bank FC in the ground Normanby Road, and also of Middlesbrough's best ever English player, Wilf Mannion. I hope you loved this video. Definitely subscribe and comment, and I'll see you soon in the next one.